Today we know that education not only empowers people, it creates healthier societies, decreases child mortality rates, and prevents diseases such as HIV/AIDS. It stimulates sustainable economic growth and decreases the risk of conflict. Education breaks the cycle of poverty. So then we must ask, why are 67 million children deprived of an education today? Why is education threatened or even halted for the 28 million of these children who live in conflict-affected countries? Why are 53% of these children girls? And why, to this day, are 776 million adults illiterate around the world? The United Nations Economic and Social Council tackled these and many more pressing issues surrounding education head-on during a week-long high-level segment aimed at driving attention, political will, and action from the international community to help ensure education for all. In Geneva on Monday, some of the more fortunate kids from around the world were given an opportunity to directly call on top UN officials and world leaders to address their concerns on education and their future. While gathering in front of the United Nations headquarters, the Palais des Nations, just minutes before the opening of the United Nations Economic and Social Council's high-level segment of the annual ministerial review addressing this year's Education for All agenda.
It is important that this council talks about education, but primarily about the economic and social dimension of the education, and this is very important. And so we ask also the question after, what is Ecosoc doing? Since we are talking on a broader level, the reforms needed inside UN, and I think we need a reform of Ecosoc, that it becomes really the economic and social body in global governance.
Present modern educational system is a bit antique, and there's a lot of new technologies coming out and softwares that people can utilize to learn languages like 5 or 10 times faster than in school. I mean, where everything starts is education, and it starts with the education of the educators.
Over 600 participants, including the biggest players in the private sector and civil society, gathered to negotiate issues and insights surrounding education. Many leaders and top UN officials, including the president of Ecosoc, Lazarus Zimbabwe, stressed the need for the full integration of the private sector to advance education goals. The Ecosoc president also aimed attention at the educational needs of the girl child and those of least developed countries, necessitating what he called fundamental education reform.
Involve the ministers of planning and finance, youth, gender, health and labor, among others, to design curricula that teaches skills that are relevant and needed by the economies and private sector job markets. A consensus that brings innovative solutions to challenges of access to education, particularly to the girl child in developing countries, especially the least developed.
Governments must act to invest out of crisis through education, and the international community must act to meet the commitments it has made. Here comes the importance of innovative financing, as we do now partnerships with the private sector. We can bridge these gaps, ladies and gentlemen, if we work together better. This means strengthening coordination between the Education for All convening agencies and with partners like the International Labour Organization, where we work on the technical and vocational education and training, and the World Health Organization, to strengthen the close link between health and education.
I think that the key thing is to acknowledge that we have a growth model that produces inequality. And on that basis, we have to take a look at how can we change that growth model so that it produces more balance, more social justice, and better results for all. Now, that essentially means concentrating on making the growth model produce jobs. Today, what you have is a growth model that is very much concentrated and managed by the financial sector because it's more profitable. So it's more profitable to invest in a financial product than to invest in a real economy company.
I don't think corporate social responsibility is going to solve the problem. It's too small, and it's a good start, and it gets companies thinking about these issues. The example of my own company, which has really invested, I think, over $500 million in education programs of one kind or another, that has been driven not really fundamentally by corporate social responsibility, but by kind of mutual self-interest.
We're at a fork in the road because we have a crisis in education. 67 million children do not go to school. Educational expenditure in aid is not going to rise, but is likely to fall in real terms over the next few years.
Some gains in education have been made, including an additional 52 million children who enrolled in primary school in the last decade to 2008, said Ecosoc. However, of the 67 million school-aged children who remain deprived of an education, almost 3/4 of those children are in sub-Saharan Africa or Southern Asia.
More resources have to be sent towards the education programs and fast-track education program, especially for the most vulnerable countries and the least developed countries, small island developing state and landlocked developing countries. And former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom have proposed an idea of setting up a global fund that will fund the education program. I think that is a good idea.
We indeed are honored to have the top NGOs and technology companies represented at this 2011 Ecosoc Innovation Fair. Over the next 4 days, member states, civil society representatives, and the public can come here to learn about the projects and products that have had a positive impact on our Education for All agenda.
UN Deputy Secretary General Asha Rose Magiro opened the Ecosoc Innovation Fair, which runs parallel to the Ecosoc Substantive Meeting, a trade show-style exhibition revealing new approaches and projects tackling issues on education to help ensure the achievement of education for all and ultimately the Millennium Development Goals by 2015 and beyond. The alarming fear is that 75 million more children may be out of school by 2015, said Gordon Brown, UK's former Prime Minister, quoting projections from a UNESCO report, making consensus and action on these negotiations all the more crucial. Bringing in homegrown initiatives on education to serve as best practices for other countries to follow, the national voluntary presentations, such as the one provided by Germany, illustrated the German perspective on education. Simply put, Germany holds education as a prerequisite for development in all areas, said Gundren Kopp, member of the German Bundestag and Parliamentary State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, while presenting how Germany contributes to the Millennium Development Goals and the Education for All initiative. Ms. Kopp told participants that education, regardless of development policy goals, is a human right and therefore something that should be supported per se.
Because we regard education as the essential element for development in all areas. For example, for economic, political, social and also cultural development. We are all agreed that education is essential for achieving all the MDGs and that it is also a catalyst for other development policy goals such as climate protection and, of course, and above all, good governance.
Germany promotes a holistic approach to education and uses this approach to support efforts of partner countries to be able to offer all people high-quality education access at all times. The German government harnesses bringing development policy to the people while raising public awareness with regard to building and advancing education in developing countries. The State Secretary highlighted the fact that each additional year of education and training increases a person's average earnings over his or her lifetime by 10%.
If we generate sufficient volumes of jobs, then you need to make sure that the education that kids get are adapted to what the demands from the markets are going to be. So the linkage between education and jobs is very important, but if the jobs are not there, then you wind up lawyers driving taxis, which we see all over the world.
The truth is that, and I'm convinced of this, is that development goes together with education. You cannot spread the education all over the world if you are not able to increase the development of particularly the developing countries. So that's why these battles go together, and we should face both of them with the same intensity.
But the approach on education requires a different slant when it comes to armed conflict. UNESCO's 2011 Global Monitoring Report warns us that still today, armed conflict is robbing 28 million children from an education, causing many children to be directly afflicted by poverty, suffering, and exposing them to widespread rape and other sexual violence. Schools are perpetrated by targeted attacks and other human rights abuses. On these concerns, part of Ecosoc's Monday discussions included a special face-to-face debate where participants tackled issues surrounding human rights, education, and conflict.
We face an immediate human rights crisis and a long-term development disaster. The time has come for the international community to take stronger action to prevent attacks on schools and to ensure access to safe and secure education for children and young people in conflict situations.
There is one main obstacle, and the main obstacle is very simple, and that's the lack of peace. It's war. Because most of those who do not have the opportunity to go to school are in war-torn society or post-war societies. And let's face it, it was when we Europeans started or stopped waging war against each other, when the French and the Germans stopped killing each other and starting forming the European Union, and when the rest of us stopped killing each other, then the huge development of the welfare states of Europe happened.
However, conflict is not the only issue causing grave setbacks on education. The global economy, namely recessionary markets, have also posed threats negatively impacting social progress. Executive heads of international financial and trade organizations informed participants attending the Ecosoc 2011 high-level segment on Education for All on its second day on the current economy and the overall state of the world economy and its implications on development factors, including education and employment for the achievement of the United Nations Development Agenda. Experts explained that the economy is recovering, currently growing at a rate of 3.3% and projected at 3.6% for 2012, but remains fragile.
This recovery is very uneven, with a growing difference between the growth of a developed economy and the growth of developing economies, whether they are emerging countries or lower income countries. And this is fully reflected on the trade side. A large part of the rebound of trade flows and of the course we have today is due to the differential of growth between emerging countries and developed countries.
We are telling the countries that we need to be more balanced. We still need to, countries need to be able to compete. They still have to build up their competitiveness, but they also have to build up the strength when it comes to the time that there may be some turbulent external disturbances like what happened. And this is something that we are concerned that recessions and global downturn could be recurrent issues.
Most of the developing world has been coping reasonably well with the crisis, and also that, as we see at the World Bank, the most structural change taking place in the global economy in recent years has been exactly this move towards developing countries becoming the engines of global growth.
Sha Zukang, Undersecretary General for the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, said that it will take another 4 to 5 years for employment to reach 2008-2009 pre-crisis levels and that more poor people are in vulnerable jobs, adding that the resurgence of rising food prices forced the world's poor populations into extreme poverty. The World Bank had reported back in February that 44 million people have been forced into extreme poverty since June last year by food inflation.
In this kind of very, I would say, unique period of recovery, and with one group recovering faster and developed countries slower, then we really need some hard thinking how to sort of, enhance or strengthen the international partnership.
It's quite fragile still. We cannot say that it's a very sustainable tendency, but we hope it will be. But if you look at the reasons for this recovery, and if we go back and see at similar cases in countries that have excelled, I would say, most in this world and have progressed immensely, these are those countries who have invested in education and in health.
Pascal Lamy, Director General of the World Trade Organization, also noted the importance of global trade for economic recovery, but warned against protectionist measures that might cause political turbulence and have a negative impact on the economy. The World Bank said that South-South trade linkage has kept growing, enabling smaller countries to develop growth strategies and continue to grow with the increasing demand of commodities, while noting that because economic recovery remains fragile, social systems should be adapted in order to produce real development and growth. Experts noted that sustainable growth and development will require more balanced income development strategies, whereby prosperity is shared and therefore making it sustainable. Continuing its deliberations to spur momentum on the UN's development agenda, Ecosoc held a special panel discussion on pushing efforts to help end poverty and achieve the Millennium Development Goals by the set date of 2015, where financial and social development experts addressed issues of inequity, sustainability, and inclusiveness, directly impacting the success of achieving these goals. Mr. Kimbabwe pointed to education for sustainable economic growth and development, also noting that inclusive and equitable growth underscores a significant social challenge, but said that uneven distribution of growth benefits that did not deliver gains to all social groups would lead to social tensions.
There is a direct relationship between poverty and education, and education is ICT. You are not going to capture, you are not going to maximize the benefits of ICT if you do not have a good education. And so the link is clear between poverty, education, ICT. ICT reduces the cost of doing things. It accelerates the pace at which we do things.
I think that this old concept of social justice has to come back into our discussion. We cannot go on assuming that this will be a mechanical and a practical and objective result of the way our growth patterns work. They have not worked that way, and we have to ask ourselves these questions.
In the past 20 years, the per capita real GDP really doubled. For the whole world, it's roughly from $4,200 to roughly $9,000. It doubled. For advanced economy, roughly 14,000 to 29,000 is double. For middle income, it's a triple. But for the low income, actually it's less double.
Juan Somavia, Director General of the International Labor Organization, highlighted that in the last 10 years, inequality has been growing in the developed world. And Cho Tae-yul, Ambassador for Development Cooperation for the Republic of Korea, said investing on human capital is key. Allowing people to find jobs would allow them to consume and therefore stimulate economic growth. Panel experts also stressed the need to deal with price volatility in food, fuel, as well as commodities, and address the issues of economic governance towards social protection, including the aging population and the world's youth.
With 980 million people in poverty and wide gaps remaining in the MDG achievements, infrastructure and other development gaps between and within the countries, the region indeed has much headroom for expanding aggregate demand for sustaining growth if it can deal with these issues and if it can actually build on income security.
I think we face a world of very significant challenges where we've discovered that just giving people handouts doesn't really work. We have to find a way of giving them the capability to help themselves, both in terms of people, organizations and communities. And what we've discovered is there are three primary inputs in health, education and enterprise that have to be integrated together to effect change. What we've discovered is if you can give people back their self-respect, then it's quite amazing how they become self-motivated to improve their environment, to actually not be a burden on others, and to create special communities. And this seems to apply across the world.
And yes, there are pockets within the United States where we certainly need to improve the education, but overall, I think just the opposite, that our educational standards have improved and that we are still leading the rest of the world in innovation.
In Kenya, we have made very steady progress. We started this program in 2003. The total enrollment in our primary schools was 5.9 million. Today, as I talk to you, we're about 9.36 million children in our primary school, an increase of about 59%. Looking at the secondary education, which was a latecomer in the program in 2008, we started with a total enrollment of 1.38 million children. Now we are at the level of 1.7 million children. Again, a very dramatic increase. So both in terms of access, we think we're well within our purview, and in terms of retention, that's the area that we're looking at the challenges that meet the program that we need to clear.
Ecosoc's high-level segment on education is yet another key opportunity for leaders to push forward political will towards structural changes that could help eradicate poverty, advance the Education for All agenda, and end global economic injustice. The high-level segment on Education for All would not be complete without a visit from UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who continues to play an instrumental role in harnessing international attention and cooperation for children's initiatives, empowering women, and strengthening efforts toward achieving the Millennium Development Goals. On his first visit to Geneva after being re-elected UN Secretary-General of the United Nations for a second consecutive term, Ban Ki-moon visited Geneva's UN office to launch the 2011 Millennium Development Goals report during the Ecosoc 2011 high-level segment on Education for All, where the UN chief said the report paints a mixed picture. On the one hand, he explained the MDGs have made a tremendous difference, from raising awareness to lifting hundreds of millions of the world's poorest from poverty, given more access to education, better health care, and improved access to clean drinking water.
Progress has been uneven. The poorest of the poor are being left behind. We need to reach out and lift them into our lifeboat. Now is the time for equity, inclusion, sustainability, and women's empowerment.
Our developed countries, they promise to support financially, they will support with financial resources. I think they also should fulfill their commitments. And of course, we also should be prepared to use this resource judiciously so that it can be helpful for all of us. And I hope that we will give further more thrust on it to implement the Millennium Development Goals and also the IFA goals.
We've gone through a catalogue of events that we think are impediments. We've also examined the worsening situations, climate change, and the hunger and drought that has ravaged most of the continent, and therefore the food prices and security create a major impediment towards the attainment of the Millennium Development Goals.
After the launch, the UN chief spoke to the media, saying that people are looking to the UN now more than ever before. Never has the United Nations been so relevant, so urgently needed, he said, by so many people around the world, and expressed the importance of media in covering the UN. South News asked the Secretary General about the issue of inequity in social development and what is needed to achieve the MDGs in regard to his propositions on political will and mechanisms for change.
We need a strong partnership. It's not the work of governments. It's the work of business communities, philanthropists, and NGOs, and even individuals. And each and every citizen can be a part of this common common efforts, and we have to meet this target. That is why today I launched this MDG report for 2011. Let us work together. We need the support from media to raise political will.
Mr. Bond visited various booths at Ecosoc's Innovation Fair. The UN chief also outlined major UN objectives, including tackling nuclear safety and security at September's 66th session of the General Assembly, to bolstering political will and finding comprehensive solutions for sustainable development within the context of next year's Rio+20 conference on promoting green economy and sustainable growth to help eradicate poverty.
Sustainable development is the key. A development that connects the dots, that deals with the particular problems as part of our comprehensive whole, that offers integrated solutions to issues of climate change, water scarcity, energy shortages, food crisis, and global health, and also women's empowerment.
Achieving its key objectives of bringing the international community's attention on stepping up efforts in education, the 54-member Economic and Social Council unanimously adopted a ministerial declaration on education and concluded its week-long high-level segment on education for all with success.
This declaration not only promotes consensus on issues ranging from the importance of education for health literacy and the need for gender-sensitive curricula, but also contains concrete measures to advance progress on education goals. It sets the stage for substantive follow-up actions in the area of education, such as the strengthening of the education cluster in humanitarian response systems, as well as improving national data collection and analysis in order to refine policies and better allocate education resources to vulnerable and marginalized groups.
Xia Zukang, Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, called the declaration a remarkable document, one which addresses important areas such as educational access, quality, funding, and partnerships.
Congratulations to our President for his steady stewardship of Ecosoc, for overseeing this week's rich program of events, and for helping the Council elevate education to the top of the development agenda.
UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova said the declaration represents a clear recognition by member states of the central role that education plays in driving social and economic development. She said, "I am confident that the vision expressed in this document will be a powerful lever for mobilizing resources and accelerating progress towards education for all." The ministerial declaration outlines measures for the global community to accelerate progress toward achieving the goal of education for all, highlighting the important message that increasing enrollment numbers is not enough. Ecosoc underlined that if education for all is indeed to be fulfilled, ensuring quality, relevance, and equity of education is equally critical. Participants, including ministers and heads of delegations, agreed to the need for government-led initiatives in spearheading the Education for All agenda, also noting the indispensable need to strengthen and create greater partnerships with the private sector, civil society, and the United Nations system, namely the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, to help strengthen the coordination and implementation of existing policies, programs, and follow-up mechanisms for education by building upon regional and international partnerships while boosting cooperation. Participants called for and look forward to the full implementation of the ministerial declaration in realizing that each child is actively enrolled and attending quality programs in schools throughout each community, and that every adult in the world is also given the opportunity and tools to be able to read and write, and therefore raise children and help create societies that nurture growth, sustainable development, and a good life for all.